From psychologically tormenting a woman for her accent, to destroying a pregnant widow's life, to breaking a child so badly history barely remembers her. These weren't accidents, these were real witch trials, and each story gets crueler than the last. First, Anne Glover. Born in 17th century Ireland, she later immigrated to colonial Boston. Recently widowed, poor, and raising children alone, Anne was already living on the margins before anything went wrong. While Anne was working in the Goodwin household, the children suddenly began showing extreme behavior, screaming, convulsing, and claiming unseen forces were hurting them. At the same time, witch trials were dominating the colony's attention. Talk of possession and witches was everywhere. The children described their suffering using the same stories adults were already spreading: demonic attacks, curses, witchcraft. The parents didn't hesitate to blame Anne. Earlier that day, she had argued with the children, and she spoke broken English, often slipping into Irish. No one else in the colony spoke it. To them, a language they couldn't understand sounded like something demonic and witchy. Anne was dragged to trial, and that's where the real cruelty began. She couldn't understand the proceedings. She tried again and again to explain herself in broken English and Irish. No one tried to translate. No one tried to listen. They had already decided what she was. Because Anne was Catholic in a fiercely anti-Catholic colony, the court demanded she recite the Lord's Prayer in English. She couldn't do it properly. Each mistake in her broken English, each word slipping into Irish, made the crowd louder. They didn't hear confusion or fear. They claimed she was performing spells in court, turning her prayer into proof of witchcraft. Then, the children were brought in. Coached and rehearsed, they screamed, collapsed, and babbled nonsense, while Anne stood terrified and confused as the allegations grew stronger against her. The court decided almost instantly. Anne Glover was declared a witch and sentenced to hang. She was executed, leaving her children orphaned, and became one of the last people put to death in Boston for witchcrafting. While Anne never had a chance to defend herself, the next woman did, and the damage was just as devastating. Elizabeth Proctor was everything Anne wasn't allowed to be: a respected wife, a mother, a regular churchgoer. By every standard of the colony, she was safe. Elizabeth employed a young servant named Abigail Williams. After Elizabeth fired her, Abigail claimed Elizabeth's spirit attacked her repeatedly. That accusation was enough to drag Elizabeth and her family into court, charged with practicing witchcraft. The court treated the accusation as proof. Elizabeth and her husband were arrested, convicted of witchcraft, and sentenced to hang. Her husband was executed immediately. Elizabeth wasn't, not because of doubt, but because she was pregnant, and the law required the court to delay her execution until after childbirth. By the time that moment came, the witch hysteria was collapsing, and her sentence was quietly abandoned. Survival didn't mean freedom. Her husband was dead. Her children were left without protection. The government seized her property, and her name was permanently stained, damage that no overturned verdict could undo. Elizabeth didn't hold back. She spent nearly 16 years fighting the government to clear her name. In the end, the convictions were overturned, and her property was returned. But no ruling could bring a father back to his children, give stolen years back to her family, or erase the humiliation they were forced to endure before her name was finally cleared. While Elizabeth's story leaves a small sense of hope, the next one offers none at all. Dorothy Good was one of the youngest victims of the trials. Born in 1687, she was the daughter of Sarah Good, a homeless poor woman surviving by begging. In early 1692, Sarah was accused of witchcraft. Dorothy, just 4 years old, was imprisoned alongside her mother. Investigators wanted testimony against Sarah, so they interrogated her 4-year-old daughter. They fed Dorothy answers and pressured her to repeat them. Under that coercion, she claimed her mother had given her a pet snake, that she could speak with animals, and that she bit people and sucked their blood for fun. Those words, forced out of a child, were recorded as evidence and were enough to convict both the mother and the daughter of witchcraft. Dorothy was chained in a dark, freezing jail. Food depended on charity. Disease was everywhere. There was no separation between children and adult criminals. She lived like this for months. During that time, her mother gave birth in prison. The baby died shortly after, and before Dorothy could recover from that loss, she was forced to watch her mother publicly humiliated and executed. Dorothy remained in prison for months after her mother's execution. When she was finally released, there was no apology, no medical care, and no acknowledgement that any harm had been done. A child placed in conditions like that does not simply recover. Whatever Dorothy had been before prison, she was no longer that child. Years later, her father petitioned the government for restitution. In official records, Dorothy was described with a single phrase, "much damaged by her imprisonment." That wording wasn't poetic, it was clinical. In an era where only major, undeniable facts were recorded, that sentence stands out. It meant lasting physical, mental, and social harm, severe enough to be impossible to ignore. I wish this story had a gentler ending, but it doesn't. There is no further record of Dorothy Good's life. She survived the witch trials, but she did not survive them intact. History marked her suffering in one line, and then moved on. And for many victims of witch trials, that was the final cruelty. Not execution, not imprisonment, but being forgotten. If you want more stories like this, you can subscribe. The next video is waiting.